Child marriage is a huge barrier to the...
King Charles's signature changed Prince Harry's place within the monarchy forever. Harry had already endured the loss of royal duties, strained family relationships, public criticism, and years away from royal life. But this time felt different. This decision was not simply about reducing his status. It removed the final private privilege that still connected him directly to the king. And when Harry realized exactly what had been taken away, it hit him harder than anyone expected. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Over the years, Harry had watched nearly every official link to royal service disappear. He stepped away as a working royal, lost military honors, gave up ceremonial responsibilities, and accepted that palace life would never return to what it once was. Yet one special connection still remained. A private household privilege allowed him to request access to certain royal residences and seek a confidential audience with the king without going through the normal approval process required for non-working members of the family. That exception meant Harry could still reach his father through a family channel rather than through palace officials. Then King Charles ended that exception. He reviewed the final document, signed his name, and quietly set the pen aside. The king understood that the order would appear administrative on paper, but he also understood what it would mean to his son. The document made it clear that palace staff could not restore the privilege on their own. Only a new written authorization from the sovereign could bring it back. That single clause made the decision feel permanent. Harry received the confirmation while sitting privately with Meghan. He read the key paragraph once, then read it again, almost as if he expected the wording to change. It didn't. His expression hardened. Lowering the document, he quietly asked, "So now even home requires permission?" Meghan remained silent for a moment. She simply watched as Harry turned away. The silence between them carried more sadness than anger. For Harry, this was never just about entering a royal residence. It was about realizing that even contact with his father now seemed to have another barrier standing in the way. William knew discussions about the privilege had been taking place, but he had not been told exactly when Charles would sign the order. And that uncertainty was about to become far more important than anyone realized. To outsiders, the removed privilege looked like just another royal administrative change. To Harry, it meant something far more personal. No matter how strained the relationship had become, there had always been one path he could still use, not as a former working royal, but simply as a son. King Charles understood the symbolism behind that privilege. William understood it too. Standing between loyalty to his father and the scars left by years of conflict with his brother, William knew the decision would be seen as much more than palace procedure. For Harry, royal residences were never just buildings. Windsor carried memories of childhood, family holidays, military achievements, and private moments shared with his father long before every conversation became complicated by duty and public scrutiny. The access privilege had given him a rare connection to that world. It was not about rank, ownership, or unlimited entry. It was simply a special household arrangement that allowed him to request private access without following the same process required for relatives outside royal service. Losing it felt less like losing status and more like losing familiarity. Charles felt the conflict more deeply than anyone else. As king, every exception he granted could be viewed as an official decision of the crown rather than a personal act of kindness. Yet as a father, he knew Harry would never see the order as a procedural matter. He would see it as a message from his father. After one private briefing, Charles remained alone with the unsigned document resting in front of him. Slowly, he ran a finger across Harry's name. A few moments later, William entered the room and immediately noticed the paperwork. Neither man spoke. The silence alone revealed how serious the decision had become. William remembered an earlier private conversation with Harry. During that discussion, Harry had said that regardless of what happened publicly, he never wanted Charles to think he had stopped being his son. The words stayed with William because they sounded less like defiance and more like fear. Now that fear seemed closer to reality than ever. William could see his father attempting to protect the institution, while knowing his brother would almost certainly interpret the decision as rejection. Meghan recognized the same pain from another perspective. She watched Harry struggle not with the loss of ceremony or privilege, but with the possibility that any future approach to his father might now begin with officials standing in the middle. Even Queen Camilla sensed the weight of the situation. At one point, she quietly asked Charles whether the wording truly needed to be permanent. The king's response was brief. "It needs to be clear." Camilla did not press the issue further. Then William learned something unexpected. Only weeks earlier, Harry had attempted to use the privilege one final time, and the outcome of that effort had changed everything. Suddenly, Charles's signature no longer looked like the final stage of a long process. It looked like the direct result of one specific event. Because just weeks before the order was signed, Harry made a request that Charles could not ignore. And the way that request unfolded would push their relationship closer than ever to a point of no return. Every family conflict has a moment that seems small at first, only to become impossible to undo later. For Charles and Harry, that moment arrived during a private weekend at Windsor, when Harry attempted to use the very privilege that would soon be taken away. Harry believed he was asking for something simple. He wanted private time with his father. But what happened behind closed doors convinced the king that the old arrangement could no longer continue. Harry arrived in Britain with one clear goal. He hoped to spend an evening alone with Charles, away from senior aides, legal advisors, and palace officials. At the time, his special access privilege still allowed such requests to move through a direct internal channel, giving them a faster route to the sovereign than an ordinary appointment request. To Harry, that distinction mattered. He believed it separated a family conversation from a formal royal discussion. Initially, Charles agreed. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that the distance between father and son might finally begin to close. Then a condition was introduced. Harry was informed that the meeting could remain private only if the conversation stayed strictly personal. Subjects such as security arrangements, titles, public statements, future royal roles, and institutional matters would not be discussed. The restriction immediately changed everything. Harry felt there was a deeper message behind it. To him, it seemed his father was willing to speak only if the most difficult issues were left untouched. According to a household account prepared afterward, Harry argued that there was little purpose in meeting as family if every challenging topic had already been removed from the conversation. Charles viewed the situation differently. He had specifically cleared private time for his son, expecting an honest but uncomfortable discussion. Instead, he was informed that Harry would not attend under those conditions. The king waited beside an untouched cup of tea until an aide quietly confirmed Harry's decision. He removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and spoke only a few words. "Then we have reached something." The sentence was never completed, yet everyone present understood its meaning. After that moment, the situation worsened. A household record of the failed meeting noted that Charles began questioning whether Harry's special access privilege was creating expectations the palace could no longer realistically meet. The issue was no longer about a cancelled conversation. It had become a question about the entire system that allowed Harry to approach the monarch through an exceptional channel, while rejecting the boundaries attached to it. William was later briefed on the incident. He understood that Harry would likely see any new restriction as punishment. But he also believed that whatever decision came next needed to be consistent and clearly defined. Too much uncertainty had already caused damage. Following those discussions, Charles requested draft proposals for ending the privilege. Yet before any document reached his desk for signature, father and son were given one final opportunity to speak directly. Neither man knew it at the time, but that conversation would determine everything that followed. When Charles and Harry finally met face to face, there were no cameras, no official statements, and no public audience. Only a father, a son, and years of unresolved tension gathered inside one private room. Harry arrived determined to defend the last remaining symbol that still connected him to royal life. Charles entered with a different objective. His focus was protecting the boundaries of the crown. Within minutes, the discussion moved far beyond royal procedure and became something deeply personal. Before approving the final order, Charles had agreed to one last private conversation, hoping that direct communication might succeed where written conditions and palace intermediaries had failed. No senior officials were present. William was intentionally kept away from the meeting. That mattered because neither father nor son would later be able to blame anyone else for what happened inside that room. Harry wasted little time. He questioned why every interaction now seemed to involve restrictions, approvals, and carefully written conditions. He reminded Charles that there had once been a time when he could approach his father as family without every discussion becoming a matter of protocol. As emotions intensified, Harry asked the question that changed the entire atmosphere. "Am I still your son, or have I become a problem to manage?" Charles did not respond immediately. After a long pause, he explained that Harry's place as his son had never been in doubt. "What had changed," he said, Was the system of access created for a very different chapter of Harry's life? The answer hit Harry hard. To him, it sounded like another carefully crafted royal explanation, one that separated affection from action. He argued that the institution had slowly removed one meaningful connection after another until almost nothing remained except the family title itself. Charles pushed back. The king insisted that the issue was not punishment. It was trust. He explained that the failed Windsor meeting had convinced him that the special privilege was no longer functioning as a bridge between them. Instead, every attempt to use it seemed to create new disagreements about expectations and limits. The conversation finally reached its breaking point. Harry rose from his chair while Charles remained seated. As he reached the doorway, Harry turned back and asked one final question. "Do you really intend to make me seek permission like everyone else?" Charles paused before answering. Then he quietly replied, "Like everyone whose life now exists outside the household." The words landed heavily. Harry stood still for a moment, absorbing what had just been said. Then he walked out. Despite the confrontation, Harry still believed the matter might not be fully decided. Charles knew otherwise. Even before the meeting had taken place, he had already instructed that the final document be placed on his desk the next morning. Harry had arrived hoping to preserve the last privilege he still possessed. Instead, the conversation convinced the king that the arrangement could no longer continue. By the following day, emotion would give way to formal authority. And once the palace machinery began moving, reversing the decision would become far more difficult than either man realized. Royal authority rarely arrives with dramatic confrontations. More often, it appears through carefully written documents, quiet consultations, and signatures placed beneath words designed to outlast emotion. Following the tense meeting with Harry, Charles faced a choice he had avoided for years. Was the final privilege still a valuable bridge between father and son, or had it become an exception the monarchy could no longer justify? The king reviewed the draft slowly, understanding that every sentence carried two meanings. One as a monarch, the other as a father. Senior household officials had already made the legal position clear. The palace access privilege existed solely because the sovereign allowed it. Since it was granted by the monarch, it could also be withdrawn by the monarch through a formal written instruction. Inside palace discussions, the argument focused on several concerns: security, confidentiality, consistency, and one difficult principle. A family member who was no longer serving as a working royal should not continue enjoying a procedural advantage unavailable to other relatives living outside the institution. When Charles reached the section ending Harry's automatic access route, he stopped reading for a moment. He asked whether the wording could be softened without changing the result. The response was respectful but firm. Softer language might create confusion. And confusion had already caused enough problems. Charles looked back at the document. He wanted to establish a boundary, not create the appearance of punishment. That distinction mattered greatly to him. Whatever disagreements existed between father and son, he refused to allow the order to read like a personal attack. William was later shown the final version privately. He did not ask his father to strengthen the wording, nor did he celebrate Harry's loss. Instead, William emphasized that unclear boundaries had repeatedly led to conflict over the years. If the rules were changing, they needed to be understandable. Charles listened carefully. The future king understood both the institutional pressure placed on the monarchy and the emotional burden carried by his brother. Then Charles made one important adjustment. Some advisors had suggested allowing limited exceptions in special circumstances. The king rejected the idea. If Harry ever received special access again, Charles wanted that decision to belong solely to the sovereign, not palace officials. The responsibility would remain his alone. Finally, the completed document was placed before him. Only one thing remained unfinished: his signature. Charles lifted the pen and held it above the page. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Camilla watched quietly from across the room and said nothing. The king lowered the pen once, then raised it again. This time, he signed. The order was now official. Meanwhile, Harry still believed there was a chance his father might reconsider. But the decision had already been made. All that remained was for Harry to receive the message and discover that the final royal privilege he depended on was gone. Harry had experienced royal setbacks before. He had seen honorary positions disappear, ceremonial responsibilities fade away, and relationships that once felt personal become governed by protocol. But the message now sitting in front of him felt different. This decision reached beyond titles and ceremonies. It told him that the final private path back to his father had been closed. There would still be invitations, requests, and opportunities to communicate. What would never return were the old terms. And for the first time, that reality cut through Harry's anger. He carefully read the official notification. The palace access privilege had been withdrawn with immediate effect. From that moment forward, any visit would require the same approval process used for relatives outside active royal service. The notice made another point equally clear. Harry remained a member of the royal family by birth. What had disappeared was the special procedure connected to his former position. That distinction mattered. The order did not change who he was. It changed how he could approach the institution that had shaped most of his life. Meghan watched as Harry reached the final section of the document. He paused. Then he read it again. Only a new written authorization from the sovereign could restore the privilege. There was no automatic review. No appeal process. No quiet way around the decision. Meghan gently asked whether he wanted to call someone. Harry slowly shook his head. He folded the document with care. For a moment, it seemed as though he was about to speak. Then his voice broke. "There's nothing left to lose now." The room fell silent. Meghan refused to allow the document to define everything. She reminded him that no palace privilege could determine whether Charles was still his father. Their relationship existed beyond procedures, offices, and royal rules. But Harry struggled to separate the emotional message from the practical consequences. To him, the signature represented more than a policy change. It showed how far the relationship had drifted. He told Meghan that Charles had not merely closed access to a residence. He had replaced family access with official distance. A short time later, another message arrived. This one came from William. The Prince of Wales acknowledged that he knew what had happened. He neither criticized Charles nor defended him. Instead, he simply made it clear that he understood the weight of the decision. Harry stared at the message longer than expected. Meghan reached toward the folded document resting nearby. For several seconds, Harry kept his hand on top of it, as though letting go of the paper meant accepting that the old arrangement was truly over. Then came a decision that surprised even Meghan. Harry did not demand that the order be reversed. Instead, he asked William for a private conversation. Not about titles. Not about access. Not about money or palace privileges. About their father. For the first time since the crisis began, Harry stopped fighting the institution and turned toward the one person who understood exactly what losing access to their father might feel like. And that conversation would change the direction of everything that followed. The most important conversation in the entire situation did not involve advisors, lawyers, secretaries, or palace officials. It took place between two brothers who shared the same childhood but carried very different views of duty, responsibility, and family. Harry did not contact William to challenge the order. William did not call to defend every decision their father had made. Instead, they discussed something far more personal. What remained of their family once royal status and institutional rules were stripped away? Harry joined the private conversation without notes, advisors, or prepared arguments. William agreed to do the same. Both men understood that too many of their recent discussions had been shaped by palace systems rather than honest communication. At the beginning of the call, William made one thing clear. He could not reverse the decision, and he would not attempt to pressure Charles through official channels. Harry listened quietly. For once, he was not asking his brother to fix the institution. Instead, he admitted what had hurt him most. It was not losing access to Windsor or any other royal residence. It was believing that his own father now felt more comfortable with a formal rule standing between them. William did not soften his response. He told Harry that every attempt to combine family reconciliation with arguments about status, security, public roles, or special privileges had made trust harder to rebuild. The words were difficult to hear. Harry fell silent. But he remained on the call. Then William shared something Harry had not previously known. According to a private household briefing, Charles had personally rejected stronger language that some officials had considered including in the order. Certain advisors had explored wording that could have portrayed Harry as a security or reputational concern. The king refused. He insisted that the document deal only with procedure and status. Nothing more. William repeated that point because he believed it mattered. Their father had removed a privilege. He had not labelled his son a threat. For the first time, Harry began seeing a distinction he had struggled to accept. Charles had not removed him from the family. The king had ended a royal entitlement that had become a source of conflict whenever it was used. The realization did not erase the pain, but it changed how Harry understood it. Near the end of the conversation, Harry quietly admitted, "I wanted him to choose me." William paused before responding. Then he said, "Maybe he's asking you to come to him as a son instead of through the palace." Neither brother spoke for several moments. The silence carried more meaning than any argument. By the end of that conversation, Harry had made a decision. He would send Charles a private message.
No demands.
No discussion of rank. No requests for special treatment. No argument about restoring the privilege. That single choice would shape everything that happened next. And when news of the order finally became public, many expected anger, confrontation, and retaliation. What they saw instead was something entirely different. By the time the decision became public, the exact wording of the order mattered less than the image it created. Prince Harry, the king's younger son, no longer possessed the private royal pathway that had once connected him directly to the heart of the institution. Commentators described the move as final. Supporters called it harsh. Others argued it had become unavoidable. Yet one quiet moment outside Windsor Castle captured the public mood better than any television debate. A small crowd stood near the gates, looking toward a place that had suddenly become a symbol of a fractured family. News outlets quickly portrayed the decision as the clearest separation yet between Harry's role as Charles's son and his former position within the working monarchy. Palace representatives emphasized that the order did not remove Harry from the line of succession, nor did it alter his place within the royal family. What disappeared was a special internal route that once allowed him to approach the royal household under different rules than other non-working relatives. Outside Windsor, reactions continued to grow. Newspapers, broadcasters, and online commentators all focused on the same question. Was this about privilege? Or was it about belonging? One newspaper headline stood out above the rest. "The last door closes." The phrase spread rapidly because it seemed to summarize the entire situation in just a few words. Some observers viewed Charles as a father choosing duty over family. Others believed years of conflict had made special treatment impossible to justify. Meanwhile, Charles watched portions of the coverage in private. When one commentator suggested that Harry had been permanently exiled from royal life, the king immediately switched off the television. Turning to an aide, he quietly remarked, "That is not what I signed." The distinction remained important to him. He had ended a procedure. He had not declared his son an enemy. But Charles was discovering that once a royal decision entered the public arena, its emotional meaning often became far larger than its legal wording. At the same time, Harry faced pressure from several directions. Some advisors believed he should respond forcefully and challenge the narrative forming around the decision. Harry refused. Instead, he approved a restrained public statement. The message confirmed that he accepted the new arrangements and intended to keep family matters private. When broadcasters read the statement aloud, the absence of anger attracted more attention than any criticism would have. Then Harry followed through on the promise he had made to William. He sent the private message he had written to Charles. There were no demands.
No acquiescence.
No requests to restore the privilege. Only one simple question remained at the end. Could a father still hear his son once the palace stood between them? And when Charles finally read those words, the conflict stopped being about royal access, protocol, or privilege. It became a question of what father and son were still willing to save. In the end, Charles did not reverse the order. Harry did not regain the privilege. There was no dramatic last-minute intervention, no legal workaround, and no unexpected palace announcement that changed the outcome. The royal door remained closed exactly as the king intended. Yet the story did not end with complete separation. It ended with something far quieter and far more complicated. Harry eventually accepted that if his relationship with his father was going to survive, it could no longer depend on rank, status, access, or special treatment. The palace access privilege was gone. The arrangement that once allowed him to request direct private access through a unique household channel had officially come to an end. From that point forward, Every future meeting would follow the same process used for other family members outside active royal service. No automatic route. No special exception. No assumption that his previous position still carried influence. For Harry, that realization forced a difficult distinction. For years, he had tried to keep two ideas connected: royal status and family belonging. Now he had to separate them. Charles remained equally firm. The king refused to cancel the decision, but he also refused to allow it to become a form of emotional exile. Harry's private message made a difference. In it, he acknowledged that the circumstances had changed. He understood the privilege was gone, but he hoped his father would still respond when approached simply as a son. The message contained no demands,
No acquiesctions.
no request for restoration. That absence gave the words greater weight. For the first time during the entire conflict, Harry was seeking connection without asking for privilege. Charles read the message alone. Afterward, he made a choice that preserved both distance and possibility. He did not withdraw his signature. Instead, he instructed his private secretary that any future request from Harry for a family conversation should be placed before him personally rather than rejected automatically. The instruction restored nothing. No privilege returned. No special entitlement was revived. But it ensured that a path still existed between father and son. William later learned of the decision through a private household briefing. He immediately understood its significance. Harry would not return through status, rank, or royal procedure. Yet neither would he be treated as though the family connection had disappeared. William saw the balance clearly. No royal exception. No complete rejection. Sometime later, Charles placed Harry's message beside the signed order. One document removed a privilege. The other asked for nothing. The king left both where they were. And perhaps that was the true meaning of the day Harry lost his final royal privilege. The palace door closed permanently, but the possibility of a father and son finding their way back to each other remained open. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more updates.